Hi everybody, welcome to Flight Chat, the first episode of Flight Chat in 2025. My name is Ray. Thank you so much for joining me, and we're finally doing this. Literally, the last time that I did an episode of this particular show was, several weeks, not several, but like a couple of weeks before the U.S. election. Man, I guess it's kind of appropriate that I'm recording this one the day before the dreaded inauguration. Not going to get into it, just tomorrow's going to be arguably the worst MLK day in history, as far as I'm concerned. Maybe you disagree, but more than likely, if you disagree, you're probably not listening to this show. Or if you are, you're heavily misguided. That's as much as I'll say about that. Be that as it may, it has been a really, really long time since we've done a feedback episode of this particular show here at theflightcast.com, which now is available, if you want to listen to this show, on Apple Podcasts, but also on YouTube, and also available on both Spotify and Pandora at this point. Yes, we've expanded a bit, if you will. You can listen to the Flightcast at all those different outlets in addition to theflightcast.com. And of course, thank you to everybody that is still a very loyal supporter of patreon.com/theflightcast. Thank you so much for all of your support there, and hopefully we can get some more content going for you. But we're going to get caught up on several months. Well, okay, what's several? Like about 3 months or so worth of feedback. It's really only come from a handful of people that have sent some stuff in. Hopefully I haven't missed anything, but let's dive headfirst into it, shall we? And as we customarily do here on Flight Chat, we're going to start with John. He sent a lot of emails. They're probably not all long, but I'm diving into this freely. This is not going to take forever. It just is not. It's not going to take like a couple of hours like some of our other episodes of Flight Chat have. But he did send some emails, starting with one on October 12th called "This is a GIF of Charlie Brown's Ugh." I'll explain while I'm using it. He says, "I'll try to make this a soft R, son, just don't, but I make no promises." All right, well, he's got a rant here. He says, "You know, Ray, I'm not sure if I'm ever going to get used to fans being so blissfully ignorant, but they always find new ways to surprise me. Where do I even begin? Gunn released an image of Superman on the moon, looking on Earth with Krypto. Seeing this image excited me. I knew Gunn said he would use Krypto, but I thought it was going to be later movies. Makes me hope Streaky appears in Girls of Tomorrow. Lean towards cats, but I like dogs too." We haven't heard anything about that yet, have we? "Some fans are actually complaining," he says, "about the new photo for the most insignificant reasons. It's the wrong breed. Where's his cape? Practice? We're talking about practice, ladies and gentlemen. You know what?" he says, "just for that, I'm going to see Superman more than once, even if I think it's bad, just to spite these gatekeepers. Krypto and Streaky are both my favorite fictional animals. You don't diss them like that. I heard some bad takes before, and this one not only takes the cake, it takes the whole damn bakery." I have not heard those complaints, and certainly not after the trailer came out did I hear people, and in fact, all I've heard since the trailer came out is, "Oh my goodness, this Superman is so much more hopeful and full of life because he has a dog. I can't wait to see that." That's what we're hearing, right? You know, not necessarily from the general audience, but from all of the Superman the movie gatekeepers and all the people that, you know, want hope and brightness and optimism brought back to Superman because, you know, they were too blind to see it in the Zack Snyder trilogy. But I digress. Let's get into the 3 questions that John had in this October 15th email. First one, he says, "This one has been on my mind for a while. Why do you think in the Multiverse Dome in the Flash movie was George Reeves' planet black and white? The last 2 seasons were in color. Is it because people associate the show as being black and white? I know Zack Snyder and Bruce Timm did that 75th anniversary short, and in that it was black and white as well. I guess people just think of the 50s as being in black and white more than they remember that they were using color by the end of the decade." Honestly, not something I've given a ton of thought, to be honest with you, John. I don't know that they gave it a whole lot of thought, but I will say that even though the last 2 seasons of that show were in color, you know, maybe they were using a clip that clearly they were using a clip that wasn't from a color episode. And I don't remember what clip it was that they used, but maybe it was just a nostalgic touch. I don't know that they gave it that much thought, to be honest with you. It's not something that I personally, if I'm being honest with you, have given a whole lot of thought in that regard. But I do think that most people associate that show with black and white and not necessarily with color, especially since, you know, I remember the episode where George Reeves showed up as Superman, you know, like George Reeves, right? Like the actor in his Superman costume made a guest appearance on I Love Lucy, which was 100% fully a black and white show through all of its seasons in that regard. So I guess the black and white era is probably the more iconic era, the more well-known era of the George Reeves Superman show, I would say, Perhaps that's the reason. I don't know. I really don't know that they gave it that much thought, to be honest with you. Second question from this October 15th email from John. He says, I've seen some people say Batman v Superman is an allegory for Democrats versus Republicans. Do you see the connection? Yes, I could. If I'm really reaching and stretching, I see the connection. However, the end result, no, I don't see what that like. What are we? No, I don't really understand, because we're not headed in that direction as far as the end result is concerned. Of the revelation and the character changes that who I would venture to guess the Republican they're talking about in the movie is. Right? Like if they're assuming that Batman is the Republican, which I imagine they would be, yeah, I don't see that party making the same realizations and doing the 180 that Batman does in that film. But I think that's enough on politics in that regard. So on to the third question. We're going to have more than enough politics over the next couple of years. There's no doubt about that. But here we go. A Halloween-related question, because again, this email was from October 15th. Do you remember the first time you found out that Michael Myers' mask was a modified Captain Kirk / Bill Shatner mask? A couple years ago. Yeah, it wasn't that long ago. It was recent, more recent that I found that out, because I'm not really into the Halloween movies. I've never watched any of them. I've never been that interested in them, to be honest with you. So wasn't really into the lore. So yeah, relatively recent, within the last couple of years that I found that out, to be honest with you. That wasn't something that I learned way back when as a Star Trek fan, to be honest with you. Did not know. Was not aware of that, to be honest with you, until, I at least the last 5 years or so was when I found out about that, for sure. So then John's next email was on October 25th. He called it Idea for a Future Reeves Batman Movie. Oh, we're going to get plenty of these theories and speculation for the next couple of years, right, as the release date for the Batman Part 2 keeps getting pushed back, if you will. But he said, what do you think of the idea of the third Reeves Batman movie being an adaptation of The Killing Joke? This universe clearly has no problems going to dark places. I have to wonder, though, would they risk making a rated R Batman movie? Potentially. I mean, listen, honestly, it really depends on where Reeves wants to go with the Batman Part 2. Because obviously the Joker is established in this universe. We know this, regardless of whether, you take the deleted scene at face value or not. It's not officially in the movie, but the Joker is officially in the movie in that scene with the Riddler at the end of it. So it just depends on what direction Reeves decides to go with who the villain is in the second film and where we build out from there. I'm willing to see it play out narratively and see the organic structure of where they're going with the story in that regard. I'm not necessarily against it, so long as, it's an idea that they come up with and it fits what they have built so far and what they're going to be building in the Batman Part 2 and whatever other spin-offs they come out of or create in the Batman Epic Crime Saga. So that's my answer with that one. He said, I haven't seen Venom: The Last Dance yet, but I'm sure it isn't that bad. It wasn't, in my opinion. The Film Online discourse continues to advocate Sony giving up the Spider-Man character rights again to Marvel, he says. I don't think that they will not do what I want them to. I think he's saying he doesn't think that they will, but he wants them to. Perhaps they should consider sharing the rights. While Marvel hasn't been consistently good as of late, I still think it would be better than being consistently bad. Well, I disagree, John. I think Sony can do whatever the hell they want with those rights. And I haven't seen, I have not, none of the Sony movies to me are just oh my goodness, I can kill it with fire. No, I've seen way worse. And I think people need to get a grip with respect to that, and this idea that, if you just give the rights to Marvel Studios, they'll fix all and they'll do everything right because of how successful the John Watts trilogy has been. Yeah, that's not a given. That's not a guarantee. I mean, they already need to get their house in order in terms of what they're going to do for the Avengers and what they're going to do with Fantastic Four and this whole thing with RDJ coming back as Doctor Doom. I feel like Marvel Studios has enough on their plate before worrying about how to fit all of the Spider-Man rights into their universe. So, you know what? I'm more than willing to pump the brakes on that. Let Sony keep the Spider-Man rights at this point. Because again, we're still waiting for the third Spider-Verse film, right? Remember Beyond the Spider-Verse? That's still Sony, right? Okay, you can't have it both ways, right? Okay, if we're going to talk about Morbius, we're going to talk about Madam Web, we're going to talk about Kraven, well, we've also got to talk about the Spider-Verse films. You still want those, don't you? Just saying. Just throwing that out there in that regard. Just pumping the brakes on this Sony Spideyverse hate fest in that regard. Yeah, I am not a part of that. I am not a party to that in my perspective. And I wasn't necessarily saying that you were part of the hate fest, but it did sound like you want them to, like you said, you want them to revert those rights back. But yeah, it's not always going to be what it's cracked up to be in that regard. That's all I'll say about that. Also, before continuing on with other emails, I just want to make this one statement because I have definitely changed social media platforms in the last couple of months, really like 2 days after the U.S. election. And I want to make this abundantly clear. If I ever change social media platforms, it has nothing to do with you guys. Nothing whatsoever. So don't take it personally. Don't act like, oh, he doesn't like me anymore. No, nothing like that. It is never anything. It never take a move like that personally. I just have different perspectives on the people in charge of certain social media platforms, and I have gone to the one that I feel the most comfortable using, which at this point is BLUESKY in that regard. So just wanted to throw that out there. Just throw that disclaimer, if you will, for anybody curious, because this was around the time that people saw that my departure on Threads and wondered what was going on, if everything was okay. Oh, I was fine. I was just, processing everything that had happened on November 5th and was, proceeding accordingly. So I'm on BLUESKY now. If you want to find me, that's where it is as far as social media goes. Anyway, almost a month after the U.S. election was John's next email on November 29th. An optional observation, he said. A fun fact. He says, while Joker is no longer the highest grossing R-rated film, it still has the distinction of being the highest grossing film with a B+ cinema score. That's pretty impressive for hard R-rated movies with an A to hit those numbers. Deadpool and Wolverine was an outlier for sure. Oh yeah, massive outlier, seriously. And anybody that doesn't understand how much of an outlier that was, I mean, they're really just, they've got their heads in the sand on that one. Deadpool and Wolverine absolutely was not the norm, and still isn't the norm at this point. And, that plus No Way Home and, maybe, actually in the last 2 years, Deadpool and Wolverine and Guardians Volume 3 are the two most successful Marvel Cinematic Universe movies to date. They have not had that kind of success with their other films, whether it was Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania or the Marvels in that regard. Movies that I all enjoyed and own all of. In fact, I own them all because I did get the Wolverine cover for Deadpool and Wolverine, that steelbook. I did get that one. I don't do the double dipping in that regard to get both. I know some people do. I decided to get what I thought was the better and possibly more rare case to find, on the secondary market, which is the Wolverine cover. I think it looks badass, and I like Wolverine more than I like Deadpool as a character. So yeah, it is what it is with respect to that. But that is interesting. The Joker, being the outlier that it is, to be a hard R-rated movie that did make $1 billion. Yeah, that's definitely out of the norm, no doubt about that. And so then John shared his thoughts with respect to the Superman trailer. And he's showing, I guess he sent in what he sent on Facebook. This is on December 19th. He said, okay, there's a lot to unpack here about that Superman trailer. The pros. He says, it looks amazing. Like the first shot of him falling in the snow instantly felt like a callback to Man of Steel. Yes, it did. Absolutely it did. He says he's dating Lois, or begins to. I was worried it was going to be another will they, won't they for a couple of films. Nope, we're jumping right headfirst into it, which is great. I love that. Crypto, he says. With all the still images we saw of him with the dog, I thought it was going to be the biggest plot point of the movie. It doesn't seem that way. No, but he does still seem to have an important part, at least from what we saw in the Take Me Home sequence in the trailer. Nicholas Hoult as Lex Luthor. He says, damn, I knew he was going to be good, but damn, I got comic Lex and Rosenbaum vibes. That's one of the more positive reactions to Nicholas Holt's Lex Luthor that I've heard, truthfully. And I haven't heard a whole lot of negative ones, but I've heard a few people that don't necessarily care for how he looks in this trailer. I don't have any issues at all, truthfully, to be honest with you. I'm willing to see what Holt does with it. And then he says, The League? Fillion as Gardner looks great. A little silly, but not laughably so. Mr. Terrific looks great. Metamorpho looks great. No complaints. They all just seem like they will serve this story. All right, so those are his pros. Now here are the cons. And I completely agree with this first con. He says, reusing John Williams' score. I'm glad it's not the exact same orchestra and it's a rock rendition, but it really should be something new, or at the very least a combination of Williams, Zimmer, and an original piece. It really is an online fan issue. I don't think the general audience will care all that much. Not only do I think the general audience won't care much, I also think they won't detect it. Like, they might get it. Like, a few of them, if you ask them, like, oh, yeah, if you remind them. But I think most of the general audience won't even catch that it's in the trailer, right? So this is a fan issue. Always has been, to be honest with you. Always will be, truthfully. He says Crypto being asked by Cal to pull him away with his cape was a little goofy. I'm okay with that. I'm all right with that because it demonstrates Crypto's ability, right, and like the super speed and all that. So yeah, I'm good with that. I didn't think that. I thought that was okay in that regard. He says practically no humor. I'm honestly shocked Gunn didn't use any jokes for this trailer. In one sense, I'm glad he displayed restraint and knew that he needed to show people he's taking this seriously. I think he could have given one funny line of dialogue, though. Overall, I really liked it, he says. I don't know if I love it, but it's really piqued my curiosity. You know, the thing about the humor, I understand why he didn't do it in this very first teaser trailer, John, because I think you're right. He did need to display that restraint, and he did need to show people that he's taking it seriously. But on top of that, I think he was also kind of highlighting, whether he meant to do this or not, he kind of highlighted the hypocrisy among the Superman gatekeepers that always, take pot shots at Man of Steel and BVS. He showed us a lot of Man of Steel and BVS-like imagery in this first teaser trailer, and they all lapped it up. They're like, oh my goodness, because the colors are a little brighter and because he has a dog. That's essentially why they completely glossed over all the stuff that was in that trailer that they have just absolutely laid waste to for the last 10 plus years about Man of Steel and about BVS in that regard. So I think that he did that on purpose, not necessarily to call out the hypocrisy, but again, to show that he's taking it seriously. And if there is hypocrisy that happens to be called out as a result of it, well, then that might be a delightful bonus for those of us who still love and appreciate the Zack Snyder films and the Zack Snyder treatment of Superman in that regard. So, yeah, I didn't have an issue with there not being the a ton of any humor or a ton of it in there, but we'll get plenty of that. We'll get the one-liners and whatnot in the full story trailer as we get closer to that. The second or third trailer, no doubt, will have more dialogue like that in there. No doubt about it. So, yeah, thank you for your thoughts with respect to the Superman teaser trailer way back when it was released, back in December. Also, John, I did just want to point out, I did get your email about that video from whoever that person was about the Snyder cult is ruining DC fandom. I have no interest in watching a video like that whatsoever, because I know it's just going to be a bunch of pointed, opinionated, biased bullshit, and I'm not interested in hearing any of that, truthfully. That person can make that video all they want. At least it wasn't a 4-hour-long video essay whining and crying about the cultist and the Snyder fandom. It was only 15 minutes, I think, however long it was. But yeah, no, not interested. I had not seen it, and I don't care to see it. I'll put it that way, to be honest with you. But I think that is it. I think that does it for John's catch-up with respect to his email. See, that didn't take too long, and we went through a decent amount of emails that he absolutely did send. So thank you, as always, John, for the feedback. Greatly appreciate it. All right, next up, let's hear from Alex De Silva, who, to his credit, he has been sending emails for the last couple of weeks, and he has made it clear in a number of these emails that I don't have to read all of these at once and that I can space them out if necessary. But lo and behold, Alex, I think we've got enough time to get through all of them here. So I think you got 5 emails, starting with your one on Friday, October 25th. So again, going a couple of months back that we can go through this, because there's definitely some catch-up with respect to Star Trek The Next Generation and other things that we do want to get into here. So let's start with that first email going all the way back to October 20... Wow, I lost my place. Here we go, October 25th. All right. He says, "Hey, Ray, I have a whole bunch of DC thoughts and questions before getting into Star Trek. The Penguin remains excellent overall," he said at that time. Episode 3 gave a much better sense of how catastrophic the Riddler's flood was. In the movie, it seemed like a major inconvenience that could shut down the city, but in the show, it actually felt like a life-threatening, dangerous event. Yes, they absolutely did a fantastic job of building that out as well, for sure. Episode 4 revealed how much of a scumbag Carmine was, he said. The fact that he's willing to just completely abandon his daughter to a mental asylum is insane. Sophia definitely isn't a full-on hero, but she's a lot more sympathetic now after this episode. Then he asked, "Did you see James Gunn's post about Crypto? What were your thoughts? I think it was a sweet post, and it feels like we're going to get some very heartwarming interactions between Clark and Crypto, in the movie. I think I remember seeing that post when it came out, but I didn't have like major thoughts on it because I'm still just in a wait and see approach. It is what it is, and I've never really been that into crypto as a character in that regard. So I was neither for nor against it. I'm just, hey, let's see what it's like. Let's see how it goes. So I certainly did not have the same criticisms that a number of other fans and people might have had that I don't think they have now in this regard with respect to that. So then he says, this is dated, but he says Creature Commandos comes out in less than 2 months, which is cool. I've seen the sentiment online that kicking off the DCU with this series of mostly unknown characters rather than an A-lister like Superman is a weird choice, since the general audience probably won't be watching this show. What's your take on this? I think that's a fan complaint. I think it's still a fan complaint, because I just saw somebody on Reddit post about this not too long ago. The general audience is waiting for Superman, and that is the official grand opening of the DCU for them. It's not Creature Commandos. So what? What's the big deal? I don't understand. It's an animated series, so why we're even treating this in the same category as Peacemaker doesn't make sense to me. This is not to be regarded the same as that show or the same as The Penguin. No, it's not that type of a series. It's a soft open for the fans, not for the general audience. Maybe it's something that the general audience might refer back to after seeing Superman, if they enjoy Superman, if they enjoy the live-action elements of the DCU that are connected. But no, I don't think it's a weird choice, because I think it's for fans. It's not the officially launched beginning, if you will. I mean, it is for us, technically, but not for the general audience. The general audience, it's all about July 11th. I don't see what the problem is, to be honest with you. I think we're overthinking it, truthfully, as fans. Maybe not you, Alex, but people that are making that comment about it, to be honest with you. Alex says, when it comes to the DCU, we've heard that individual projects will be given full creative freedom, as opposed to something like the MCU where each individual movie has its own creative flair, but you can still usually tell when you're watching an MCU movie. Do you think there's a risk that the DCU movies could feel too individual and, as a result, disjointed and like they're lacking cohesion? I suppose, Alex, but I'll be honest with you, I feel like a lot of that worry comes from our conditioning from the MCU, because we've seen what they've done over the last, how many years is it now? I'm going to break out the calculator just so I make sure that I have this right. It is 2025 now, right? 2025 minus 2008, which is when Iron Man came out, 17 years. We're nearly 17 official years away from the launch of the MCU, right? That's how long the franchise has been around. That's how long they've been around to ingrain to us exactly what this cohesion and lack of disjointedness is with respect to television and movies in the same universe. And I feel like the DCU is hopefully trying to be the anti-MCU, not the MCU 2.0, and avoid the homework problem. So I feel like the idea is that the creative freedom is there so that these stories are still standalone within a universe where they all exist. And I appreciate that. I do like that. I don't think there needs to be an Infinity Saga. I don't think there needs to be a multiverse saga. I think the idea of dropping us into the middle of a fully fledged, functioning DC world where stories are happening individually and have some connective threads here and there, I'm perfectly fine with that. And I think there's some precedent for this in live action as well. If you look at, sometimes I would say the Arrowverse to an extent, certainly. I mean, yes, they had their converging plot lines, but there were definitely times where the Flash cast would go to Star City and deal with the Arrow cast and vice versa. Times where, some of those characters ended up on Legends of Tomorrow, right? Independent of the crossovers, right? Independent of Elseworlds and Crisis on Infinite Earths and Crisis on Earth X and stuff like that. So I think there is structure and precedent for that to work. Also, if you look at the Dick Wolf Chicago universe, they have their crossover stories, but they also have times where, like something's going on in a Chicago PD episode and Chicago Fire shows up, or they go to the hospital and deal with doctors from Chicago Med. I think it's like that, a living, breathing world where there are times where they could converge for a big crossover, but they don't have to, and it won't feel disjointed and it won't feel like they're lacking cohesion because they all still take place in the same universe, right? So I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt on this, and I'm curious to see what this approach is going to look like. Again, especially after our 17 years of conditioning on what the structured approach, the structured cohesive, for the most part, approach is that we've seen with the MCU. So we'll wait and see on that. And then he said, finally, last DC question for this October 25th email. You might have already touched on this one in the past. Apologies if so. What do you think are the chances that Reeves' Batman becomes the DCU Batman? Would this even be something you'd want to see? None and no. I don't fall into that category. I know people are trying to will it into existence because their brains can't handle the idea of two different Batmen, and they love what Pattinson's Batman has done so much in the Batman that they really want it to be a part of the DCU. I don't want it to be a part of the DCU. I want the Batman Epic Crime Saga to stay its own thing, and I don't want that to happen. I do not want to see that connection. I don't think it fits. Whatever comic book stuff they decide to do in the Batman Epic Crime Saga, I think that clearly, based on what we've seen so far with Superman, that they're going in a very more fantastical direction, and I'm okay with that. I'm perfectly okay with that. This idea that the general audience can't handle two different Batmen at the same time, why are we even worrying about that when we don't even know if Superman is going to succeed yet? The Batman, the Brave and the Bold will not happen if Superman does not succeed in July. Period. Right? So before I even worry about that, let me see what the DCU does first. Let me see what the Batman Epic Crime Saga does first. I can only deal with what actually exists. And at this point in time, what actually exists are that Robert Pattinson's Batman and David Cornsweet's Superman are in separate universes. I will deal with what we've got, as opposed to speculating on what we want, or rather what others want, because I don't want them connected. Just being completely honest with you. So here we go on to his next-gen catch-up for this particular October 25th episode. He said, first up, the episode Unnatural Selection, because he was definitely still in the middle of Season 2, the Dr. BLUESKY season. Oh, yes. He said, so that one character was supposed to be 12 years old? Yeah, I don't know about that one. Yeah, no, he was like 20s. Absolutely, no, he was not 12 by any stretch of the imagination. Yeah, I know what you're talking about there, Alex. Yeah, age was an iffy thing to portray back in the 90s for whatever reason, whether they did it with makeup or whether they just had older actors trying to play a lot younger than they actually were in real life. Yep, didn't work out very well on that one. He said, Darwin Station was a fitting name considering the content of this episode. Yes, very much so. Survival of the fittest, right? At least BLUESKY started being a bit less rude to Data in this one. Yes, a bit. A little less rude. We'll give her a little bit of credit with respect to that. Yes, indeed. Next up, he watched A Matter of Honor. He says, I like that the Enterprise basically has a phaser shooting range. It makes sense that officers would need to consistently practice firing to keep their aim sharp. Oh, yeah. No, that part is fun. Like him and Picard shooting the Dustbuster phasers on the holodeck. Yeah, I do enjoy that. He says, I was eating lunch while watching this episode, and all the Klingon food made me want to throw up, especially that gach. Even the name of that food item sounds like someone trying not to hurl. Well, yeah, it's worms. It is. It's worms that they're eating. And yeah, Star Trek food, especially with certain alien groups, I will just already warn you ahead of time. If a Ferengi cuisine comes up, nope, don't mess with that. Yeah, you don't necessarily want to be eating while watching Star Trek. You don't, because yeah, you're going to see some things. You're going to see some culinary delights from the other aliens in the galaxy that just are not going to look like it edible or anything that you would want in your brain when you're trying to eat actual food. So yeah, I feel you in that. Hopefully you're able to keep your lunch down while watching that. That was bad timing in that regard. He says, Riker displayed clever knowledge of Klingon culture to resolve the problem at the end. I liked the resolution here. Yeah, Matter of Honor, kind of an underrated, off the wall episode, not necessarily like one of the heralded classics, but yeah, definitely had a decent resolution and good setup in that regard. And there is going to be that program. Keep that program in mind. And all I will say, Alex, is just remember that was an exchange program where a Starfleet officer went aboard a Klingon ship. At some point in the not too distant future, the reverse is going to happen with a lot more bigger implications as a result of why it's happening. Just remember that. I'll just throw that out there. Trust me, if you keep that in the back of your mind, and you will be greatly rewarded when that episode happens. I'm not going to say when, and I'm not going to say how far down the road, but just keep it in the back of your mind. No doubt about it. All right, so on to Alex's second email of this catch-up. The next one that he sent was on November 22nd. It looks like he was kind of sending these monthly a little bit, but he's got some random thoughts and then a bunch more Star Trek episodes. But first off, he started off by saying on November 22nd that it seems the turmoil with the Blade movie never ends. Can it really be this complicated to make a Blade movie? It can be a very simple story and still be enjoyable. Just have him kill a bunch of vampires and face off against a mega vampire at the end. I think that's all the audience really wants from a Blade movie. What is it about this project that's apparently so tough for the creative team to crack? Well, I think Marvel is just going through it. Listen, it's been 17 plus years, and the strikes from a year or so ago certainly did not help their position, and all this upheaval and things that have been going on. Not to mention, not the warmest of receptions for their last couple of movies outside of Deadpool and Wolverine. It is what it is, in that regard. So as far as the Blade movie being in development, I feel like that's just, we're not used to Marvel having projects in development hell, but here's one right here. And, for all the years that we saw the Marvel Cinematic Universe hum like a fine oiled machine, now we're seeing some of the growing pains and the warts that we've seen DC run into, that we've seen Sony run into. And so now I would think that perhaps we could look at this and go, well, like I've been saying, and like many of us have been saying all along, all these studios are not immune to that, right? And these stories get out, right? Stuff happens. Maybe there were more of these stories that were happening that you didn't hear during the heyday of the MCU, but now you are hearing them. And basically, this is what Hollywood deals with, right? And who knows when the Blade movie will get off the ground, if ever. But yeah, this is just the nature of business in Hollywood. It is what it is. And I hear you. You basically just described the plot of the Blade trilogy. That's certainly the first Blade film, which I do own, Inglorious Steelbook. But yeah, what seems simple to us, far more complicated for executives and people involved in Hollywood. That seems to be always the case, to be honest with you, for a number of reasons. But continuing this conversation about the MCU and its perception, Alex says it's become clear that the audience perception of the MCU has changed since Endgame. Do you think the quality of the movies has actually dropped since then, or have the taste of the audience just changed since 2019? I think it's way more the latter, because as somebody, like I've been watching the MCU through phases 4 and 5, and I don't think that they're doing anything quality-wise, subjectively speaking, that is really all that different than what they've been doing in the previous 3 phases. I don't. I really just don't feel that way. I mean, if you want me to act like, oh, Multiverse of Madness is so different, Wakanda Forever was so different. No, it's just that there were people, after the Infinity Saga ended, there were people looking for the next Thanos, looking for the next big thing, and they haven't gotten it, and so they're like, well, wait a minute, where is it? So maybe it's not that their tastes have changed. Maybe they're just looking for what the next big arc is, and they don't like the fact that the last 2 phases have not had that big arc, or that the arc has been in turmoil because of the whole changing of course with respect to Kang and the Jonathan Majors thing that they may or may not know about, right? That type of deal. But that's the thing, is I think it's way more on the audience changes, and not just because of, maybe they're looking for something that Marvel hasn't been giving in the last couple of years, but also I think, their sensibilities with respect to superhero movies. I'm hearing people talk about superhero fatigue, and really it's Marvel's own fault because of how much they've flooded the marketplace with so much of their movies. But yeah, I think that the chickens are finally coming home to roost as far as the expectations are concerned. And that's why the RDJ thing is happening with him being Doctor Doom. They're trying to drum up that excitement again and get everybody back on that horse. And whether they can do it or not, we'll see. But, unless it's a massive team up that people have been anticipating, like Deadpool and Wolverine, or Spider-Man No Way Home, it hasn't really been that big of a massive success like the Marvel Cinematic Universe is used to. And I think they do need to find some type of level here with respect to what they're doing going forward. But I do think it's more of the audience perception than it is the quality of movies. There really is nothing. I can't think of a phase 4 or 5 movie, even the one that I really do not care for, Thor Love and Thunder. I don't see anything that is so massively or wildly different about those movies as opposed to all of the ones that were in the Infinity Saga as far as subjective quality is concerned. So yeah, I think it's way more the audience changing their taste than it is Marvel doing anything different on their end, to be honest with you. So now here's a Star Wars question from Alex back on November 22nd. He asks, isn't this opening? There it is. He asked, what are your thoughts on the apparent new Star Wars trilogy that's in the works? There are rumors that Rey will be back to fill the Obi-Wan role. I really want to see Rey back. I just hope that 1, they plan out an entire complete story arc before starting production of the first movie, and 2, they make the trilogy feel new and not like a rehash of things we've seen before. I'd like to see a whole new, well-thought-out story. I will believe it when it goes into production. That's kind of where we're at with Star Wars as far as production is concerned. They seem to be much more focused on greenlighting and actually bringing to fruition their TV series as opposed to their movies. So I'm going to wait and see approach with respect to Lucasfilm. I am curious to see what they do and curious to see what direction they go in should they, bring the movies back to light in that regard. But we'll cross that bridge when we come to it in that regard. Let's see. He then asked, what happened on Threads that caused you to leave it? Mark Zuckerberg happened. Mark Zuckerberg and his political leanings, and basically the way that the things that we know about algorithm throttling on Threads. That's as much as I'll say about it without getting too heavily into it. But yeah, I dumped it 2 days after the election, and I'm not going back. In fact, truthfully, I'm not going back to Meta. I know that the FLITEcast Facebook page still exists to this point. I don't know how much longer it's going to exist, truthfully, because I think it's time to build up an audience and continue the audience through other means that are not controlled by Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk in that regard. That's as much as I will say with respect to that, because I don't want this to get so heavily political, but that's to answer your question, Alex. But then he says, I watched a bunch of new TNG episodes this time around. First up was The Measure of a Man. Okay, this is a watermark episode. Yes, this is. The Data's, the question of whether or not Data is property. His sentient rights, his sentience up on trial. He says, when it comes to the poker scene at the start, I understood nothing. I learned how to play poker years and years ago, but I've since forgotten just about all the rules, so I was pretty lost during this segment. I think that's interesting because the poker scenes in TNG actually led me to learn how poker works. That and the movie Maverick, truthfully, is where I had the impetus to learn how poker works because I wanted to know how the game was going. And I feel like it did help me pick up on that. But I believe this is the first poker scene, if I'm not mistaken. And get used to it. They play poker a lot. Trust me. So learn the rules. I'm just warning you now. Learn the rules right now so that you're not lost, because this is going to happen a whole lot. This is going to become a big part of the series going forward. Trust me on this. He says, I feel like Data is the beating heart of this show. He's just so likable, and I bet he was immensely popular with audiences. I don't know about that, but he is my favorite character, truthfully. He's my favorite character. He and Spock are my two favorite characters in the whole franchise. He's probably my favorite character, overall, and I love the fact that Brent Spiner in real life is left-handed, which is why if you ever pay attention, Data unsheathes his phaser with his left hand. That's how I found out he was left-handed, and I love that, because I'm left-handed, so fantastic in that regard. He said, I thought for sure Dr. Pulaski was going to be the one who would argue against Data in the trial situation. Probably wouldn't have been too tough for her to come up with arguments against his sentience. Yeah, but they needed a reason, the challenge to his sentience was the idea that Maddox, somebody from Starfleet Intelligence or cybernetics, wanted to disassemble him to learn how to duplicate him, and so that's where the question comes into play. So he had to place an even bigger threat on Data's life than even Pulaski could as a medical doctor aboard the Enterprise in that regard. So that's why they went that route with it. And it worked quite well, I thought, in that regard, to really up the stakes for Data's sentience and his life being on the line. He says, so Data was intimate with Yar? That seems like a pretty big revelation. I wonder if that is a callback to that Naked Time episode. Yeah. Yes, Alex, that's exactly what it is. They had sex. Data and Yar had sex in the Naked Time. That was made very clear in that episode, especially the point where she's like, I'm only going to say this once. It never happened. So yes, that is absolutely a direct reference, and that is also something that is going to pop up from time to time going forward. So remember that. Data and Yar, absolutely, Data and Tasha Yar absolutely had sex. Yes, no doubt about it. All right. So next up, he says, was the Dauphin. He said, this was a pretty solid episode. I was not expecting the whole shape-shifting element. Must have been tough for Wesley to be crushing on such a pretty girl only to find out she's some weird light being. The Dauphin is an episode that I don't necessarily remember a ton of. I do remember that part of it, but yeah, it's not one of my favorites. It's not one that I consistently rewatch in that regard, but it is what it is. It's another of the more solid episodes in this second season. But then there's Contagion, he says, that he watched next. He said, the teleportation device at the end made me think about the larger implications to the Star Trek universe if they'd been able to study and replicate that technology. Imagine they were able to just instantly teleport places. That would take away a lot of the necessity for starships. I imagine there would still be ships like the Enterprise that are commissioned for exploration, but transportation would be cut down significantly as people could just instantly get to where they needed to go. Yeah, that was the point of the Iconians, Alex. That was exactly what they were doing. The idea basically that they didn't have to leave their planet in order to transport and explore the galaxy. That's absolutely why they built the gateways. And the gateways are like this historical plot device that does pop up. This is another thing that pops up, and I won't just even say in TNG. This pops up in Star Trek a few times here and there as far as the Iconian gateways and the dangerous implications of the existence of the Iconian gateways. Absolutely, no doubt about it. But yeah, the Iconian technology, as you see in this particular episode, if it falls into the wrong hands or if it goes haywire, it can absolutely spell death and destruction for those involved, like Captain Donald Varley and the crew of the USS Yamato, which that was always a chilling scene when I first saw that as a kid, to see another ship that looked exactly like the Enterprise just explode at the beginning of the episode. It was just, it was something else, seriously. But yeah, remember the Iconians. Keep that in the back of your mind, for sure. And then he said, finally, for this email on November 22nd, that he watched The Royale. He says Picard's detective alter ego would fit right into this casino environment. He would have had some fun here. Yeah, Dixon Hill, for sure. I hear you on that. He says, I'm not the biggest fan of the fact that the phasers look like TV remotes more than they do weapons. They'd look much cooler if they were modeled after guns. They're going to get a redesign. It's not going to look like guns in that regard, at least not the Type 2 hand phasers. When we get to the phaser rifles, that'll be more up your alley, I'm guessing. But they will get remodeled in that regard, to be honest with you. They'll look a little less like TV remotes. Actually, significantly less, in my opinion, truthfully. He says, this episode contains such a random concept, a black void of a planet where seemingly the only thing that exists is this hotel created by aliens as a result of an astronaut's 20th century novel. It was essentially another mock Earth story, and we all know how I feel about those. Yeah, it's not the best. It is what it is. I do enjoy this episode for what it is because I think there are some cool moments in it. But, it is one of those like weird type of filler episodes, if you will, here in this second season, which many still consider a filler season in that regard. But let's move on to Alex's third email here in this catch-up that he sent on December 13th. And he starts off by saying, why does it seem like whenever a sports dynasty comes to an end, that particular team drops down to garbage tier? Why does it seem like they never go from being great to just being good? Oh, he's got to be talking about the Patriots. Yep. Absolutely. He says this question was prompted by me watching the Patriots the last few weeks. It's tough to imagine this was the team that won 5 championships over a 20-year period. Well, yeah, that's the thing, man. Like, wasn't it 6? Or when did they win the 6th one? Because Brady has 7 rings. 6 with New England and 1 with Tampa Bay in the COVID year. But either way, that's how it happens, man. And I'm still waiting to see if I'll ever experience that ever in life. And I'm not looking for 6 in a 20-year period. I'm looking for 1. And I don't know that I'll ever see 1. I felt like this year I might, but those dreams were destructively dashed just the day before me recording this episode, and I'm still extremely bitter about it. And I'm going to be bitter about it for a minute, to be honest with you. So, you know what? I don't have a whole lot of sympathy for you on that one, Alex, just saying. But it is what it is. Maybe, but not Gerard Mayo, but who'd you guys just hire? You guys just hired a new head coach. Mike Vrabel, that's right. Let's see how Mike Vrabel, let's see what he does. Maybe he can lead your Patriots back into the promised land, right? The promised land that you so eminently were a part of for 2 decades. Wow, that must feel nice. Doesn't it feel nice? Yeah, I may never know how the hell that feels, Alex. So my sympathy for you does not exist. Just saying, just being completely honest. But at any rate, he says, I watched Wicked at the theater, and this experience just furthered the feeling of me not wanting to go to the theater anymore. Oh boy. The biggest problem seems to be the prevalence of unaccompanied teenagers. They're just so incredibly annoying and obnoxious. There was a group of girls sitting toward the front of the theater that kept talking, laughing, and swearing at each other. Not only that, they kept getting up and running out of the auditorium, then running back in, sitting for a few minutes to laugh and cuss at each other, then running out again. They treated the place like a playground. It's just baffling, and I don't remember being nearly this annoying when I was a teen going to the movies with friends. I'm now firmly in the camp of only going to the movies for major blockbuster events like Deadpool 3 and Wicked, and ideally at matinee times. Long gone are the days of people dressing up for a night out at the theater. Nowadays, they treat it as if they're watching a movie in their living rooms. Yeah, now this is where you will get some sympathy from me on that, because lately I've made it a habit of going at matinee times, and specifically, like, because I get out of work at noon, going before even the end of business while people are still at work. Right? The last time I was in a massively full theater, truthfully, that I can remember was Barbenheimer, and Oppenheimer wasn't filled, but Barbie was. And yeah, there were these idiot kids that were throwing popcorn and being all manner of loud to the left of me, and it was just, it wasn't a pleasant theater experience to be with that many morons and young kids in the theater. So I'm with you. I feel you on that. And I don't know if these theaters are ever going to regulate that. It is what it is, sadly. But, unless it is a theater with recliners and there's a good amount of space in between people, right? Like they do at the Imagine theaters that we have up here. Or unless it's a matinee before end of business, yeah, I'm probably not going to go see it either. Deadpool and Wolverine, I'll tell you, it was great to go see that at like 1:30 in the afternoon with like 10 other people in the theater. It was amazing. It was fantastic. I didn't need a full theater for that. I know some people are like, you missed out on so much. No, I didn't. I was there to see the movie, and I saw the movie, and I had my reactions to it, and other people had their reactions to it, and I did not miss a damn thing, and it was glorious, and it was awesome. And that is how I feel like my movie-going experience is going to be enjoyable going forward. So yeah, I'm with you on that one, Alex. I really am. I hear you, truthfully. He then says, in preparation for Creature Commandos, I decided to re-watch The Suicide Squad. I wasn't crazy about it the first time I watched it, and though it didn't reach nearly the same heights as Gunn's work with Guardians of the Galaxy, this time around, I found the first two acts of The Suicide Squad to be pretty weak, but then things really pick up when they get to Jotunheim, and I was entertained by the third act a lot more than the first time I watched. Gunn is pretty good with emotional beats, and that makes me trust what he's going to do with Superman. A knock on the movie for me, though, is that I'm not really a fan of Gunn's R-rated humor, he says. I feel he goes way too overboard with the jokes and tries too hard to be edgy, and it just winds up feeling uncomfortable, weird, and forced rather than funny. I thought the same thing about the Peacemaker show, too. That show is like all the worst parts of the Suicide Squad and none of the good, all packaged into one product. Well, subjectively speaking, Alex, I disagree with just about your entire paragraph. I hear what you're saying with respect to his R-rated humor, but I've just come to be like, that's just how he's going to do humor. I don't really see it being terribly different than other R-rated humor that I've seen that, tries to be edgy and push the envelope on certain things or whatever. But I didn't mind it in Peacemaker because I was expecting it, especially from centering a show around that character of Peacemaker, the way that John Cena plays it. And, when you say you thought that the Suicide Squad did not reach nearly the heights as Guardians of the Galaxy, I very much disagree with that. I think the Suicide Squad is still his magnum opus as far as comic book movies is concerned, because there's a lot of storytelling stuff and there's a lot of visual beats that he does that he would never have been allowed to do with Guardians. And don't get me wrong, I still enjoy Guardians 1 and Guardians 3, and I'm not as down on Guardians 2 as I used to be. But I do think that to date, The Suicide Squad is James Gunn's best comic book film. And hopefully, with any luck, we'll say that Superman is better. That is the hope. That's what we're counting on, or that's what we're hoping for. At least that's what I'm hoping for with respect to the success of the DCU. We'll see how that goes. But at any rate, he says, as for Creature Commandos itself, it was just fine. It definitely feels nothing like the kickoff of a brand new cinematic universe. Not crazy about the humor here either, but I'll still continue watching and giving it a chance. What I'm really looking forward to with the new DCU, though, is Superman next year. Yeah, because again, Creature Commandos is the soft launch for the fans that are interested in the subject matter. Superman is the grand launch. Again, not saying that you're making this difficult, Alex, but I don't understand why other fans are making that difficult, asking the question like they don't get it. And it's like, there's nothing to get. Superman is the official huge launch. Creature Commandos is just an appetizer. I don't see why that's difficult, but it is what it is. He says, on the other hand, a show that I thought was really, really strong is Skeleton Crew. I'm of the opinion that Star Wars and Disney Plus lately has been really mediocre, but this show is such a strong return to form. They marketed this as an Amblin adventure type of story, and they were spot on with that descriptor. I loved that kind of movie when I was a kid, and watching this show makes me nostalgic for childhood and being a kid again. It's done really well, with a likable main cast and an intriguing central story. They also did a great job of taking the feeling of a pirate story and transplanting it into the Star Wars galaxy. The first 3 episodes currently out are all great, and I'm thoroughly looking forward to experiencing this story week to week. Again, he wrote this on December 13th is when he wrote this. Skeleton Crew, of course, has ended, so he might provide some ending thoughts on it and what he felt about it, because it sounds like he continued watching this. But that's one that I still need to get caught up on. So hopefully there aren't any big spoilers that he throws into it. But he says when it comes to your statement, my statement there is of there being too much to watch, yeah, I completely agree, he says. I'm also falling way behind on things. I still need to watch the Penguin finale. Well, hopefully he's watched it. since December 13th. But he says, one of the main things getting in the way of my TV and movie watching is the fact that I started following sports a lot more closely the last few months. I prioritize watching games over TV and movies because I'm just having fun doing so. But the negative side to that is I inevitably start falling behind on things. In addition to that, I've just been switching on-off playing career mode in MLB The Show and career mode in F1 23, which is causing me to fall behind on my story-based video games too. I've pretty much come to a halt on Assassin's Creed Unity. Ah well, we're never going to be able to watch or play all the things we want. I think the best thing to do is just prioritize the ones you feel most excited about. If watching something starts to feel too much like a task that needs to be done rather than a fun way to spend time, then I have no problem just dropping that particular thing and moving on to something else that seems more enjoyable. Yeah, I hear you on that. And to me, when it comes to movies and shows, like I think when I get the urge or the itch to watch it, that's when is the best time for me to watch it in that regard, right? Not necessarily to like fulfill like some type of quota or like to, check another box off a list or something like that. And I hear you with the sports stuff. I mean, full disclosure, the reason that I finally sat down to record this catch-up episode of Flight Chat is because the Lions got eliminated from the playoffs last night, and I'm done with football for the rest of the year. The Rams played the Eagles earlier today. I know the Eagles won. I didn't watch the game. I've already paused my YouTube TV for the next 7 months. I don't need it anymore because football season is over for me thanks to the stupid-ass Washington Commanders, who I hope get destroyed in Philly next week. We'll see how that goes. I hate Washington at this point for a number of reasons. But yeah, so now that distraction is gone for me. I don't have to worry about watching any more football. I damn sure am not watching the national championship game between Ohio State and Notre Dame. Ugh. Can we root for the Meteor? I would root for the Meteor in that scenario. But if one of them has to win, please let it be Notre Dame. We'll see how that goes. But whatever. I'm not watching the game. I have no other football to watch. I don't have any access necessarily to watch hockey and basketball because Bally's is not available like on my streaming services. So now is a great time for me to finally now get caught up on movies and television over the next couple of months until baseball season starts. And even then, I still won't necessarily have an outlet to watch baseball because same problem that I have with Bally's, or it's not Bally's anymore now, it's FanDuel Sports Network that, isn't available on YouTube TV or streamers still to this point. So I've got some time here to get caught up because sports is not going to be a distraction for me going forward. It is what it is. And you know what? Just because I'm bitter about it, I hope the Chiefs win the Super Bowl so that everybody else can be pissy about the refs helping them become the new Patriots. Yes, that is totally a thing that people are upset about. And since I'm unhappy with my Lions being, the number one seed, a fake number one seed apparently because they couldn't even get out of the divisional round of the playoffs at home at night, making 1,000 mistakes last night, then I want everybody else to be miserable. I don't want anybody to be happy, except maybe Chiefs fans. So Brent, if you're listening to this, go Chiefs. Hope you guys win and piss everybody else off. I'm fine with that. Whatever. But let's get to your TNG catch-up here on this third email. You said you watched a few episodes. First up was Times Squared, which you watched the week of Thanksgiving, you said. Riker preparing a home-cooked meal for his crewmates at the start was actually a surprisingly timely scene. Yeah, that was the eggs, right? The O1 eggs that everybody but Worf hated. I think that's what that was. He said this was a decent episode. I want more of this and less of the mock Earth stuff. So Picard had to kill his future self to break the time cycle and plunge straight into the warp hole instead of trying to escape it. He kind of just lucked out that going through the warp hole was the right answer, though, since that could have just ended in death for all he knew. I think it's interesting that you glommed onto this episode because I feel like the line at the end where Picard says, a lot of questions, number one, damn few answers. I feel like that's how a lot of fans feel about this particular episode, and I don't know if it's one that people or fans glom onto like that, but I hear you. It is a different episode. I don't dislike the episode at all. I think it is one of the stronger episodes of this weaker season, but, it is what it is. To each their own. It's all subjective, no doubt. Next was the Icarus factor. Oh, what did he feel about this? He said, what exactly is this episode title referring to? It's been a few weeks since I watched it. I know the myth of Icarus, but I didn't spot any clear parallels. Perhaps with Icarus, I don't know, flying too close to the sun? I don't know. I think I looked that up once, but I really don't know. You know what? Let's Google that real quick. How about it? So here we go. This is straight from the wiki, the Wikipedia entry for this episode. It says the title is derived from Greek mythology, the story of Daedalus and his son Icarus. The story idea came from David Assail. He said he was handed an outline, or Robert McCullough, rather, was handed an outline of a father-son story for Riker, and asked to rewrite it. Wanted there to be a confrontation and for them to reconcile after. He used what he knew of karate philosophy to add to the fight scene in the fictional art of Anbo Jitsu. Jonathan Frakes liked the script and appreciated being the center of the story. This isn't saying anything about the meaning of the title, though. I don't know. And the only other, definition for Icarus Factor I can see is it's apparently a term used to describe a business leader's ill-fated attempt to take on an overly ambitious project. Does that have to do with Riker, like his father trying to take over an overly ambitious son? I don't know. I think we're thinking too much on that, so I'll leave that where it is. But he said pain sticks, huh? The writers must have been in a time crunch when they came up with that one. I mean, why? You were looking for like a Klingon name? There probably is a Klingon name for it. I don't know what it is, but they've just always been regarded as pain sticks. I mean, they do their job in that regard, so it is what it is. So the Hakadan Kuritsu was an illegal move, but what exactly was it? Was it the trip? Maybe. Again, Anbo Jitsu doesn't exist, and it's derived from karate, so I don't know. These are details that I'm sure somebody has fleshed out in some type of fan fiction or something, but nothing that I necessarily paid a whole lot of attention to. I'm way more interested in this next episode you watch, which is Pen Pals. Because you said it's funny how throughout this episode, Picard just wants to write his source on the holodeck, but he keeps getting interrupted from doing so. The crew just completely disregarded the Prime Directive in this one, but I like that. It shows that they're all human. Well, not all technically, but you know what I mean. Well, yeah, because the one who violated the Prime Directive was the not human one, Data. He's the one that did it, and they all just had to follow suit and had his back basically. He said this one had an interesting premise where the Enterprise serves as the first contact with interstellar life for Sarjenka's planet, although the planet will never know it. By the way, if you didn't know, Sarjenka is played by a very young Nikki Cox. If you don't know who that is, Google her and you'll see her career in that regard. But yes, that is her in that makeup. Very, very young at that particular time. She was a child. I forget how old she was. But the relationship between her and Data is adorable in terms of him being her savior in that regard on, an imperiled planet. And yes, it is first contact procedures, but not conventional by any stretch of the imagination. And yes, a massive violation of the Prime Directive. No doubt about that. So let's see. That's Alex's fourth email, I think, on this catch-up. His next one, he only sent a week later on December 20th. That's when he started telling me that there was no pressure to read them all in one go. But no, we're over halfway there, so we're going to keep going. This is another bit of a longer one. He says that the Celtics are at the top of the NBA in regards to scoring three-pointers. A lot of critics are accusing them of making basketball boring because they score so easily and so often against most teams. Many of these critics have even gone so far as to suggest the elimination of three-pointers from the league, for only allowing three-pointers to actually count as 3 points in specific quarters of the game. What are your thoughts on this? I think those suggestions are ludicrous, but I'm biased in favor of Boston, of course. The Celtics have just elevated the game to a certain level, and now other teams need to step up and respond to our play style rather than us being forced to drop back down to everyone else's level. Well, I do think that I agree with you that those types of changes are ludicrous, but I also think that three-pointing has ruined the game. I do. Because now there's not even a point to have post players or anybody in the paint anymore, right? There is no mid-range jumper. There is no back to the basket. The tall guys, the power forwards, just step back to the arc and fire threes all the time. That's why we see so many crazy lead shifts, like in the playoffs and in the regular season, and that's why games are ending in the hundreds, right? If you give up 110 points a game in the NBA, you're considered the top defensive team in the league, and that's partially because a big part of it is because so many three-pointers. To me, it's just severely watered down, and I don't necessarily blame the Celtics for that. I blame the league. I think the league has perpetuated that mindset, and yeah, it's not fun to watch. Not for me. Everybody just sitting jacking up threes. I mean, where's the physical presence? Where's the stuff down in the paint? Where's any of that anymore? All that's gone. It's just sterilized. And again, I'm not blaming the Celtics for it. And you're certainly not. No, this isn't happening. Like people that are accusing them of making it boring. No, the whole league is boring because teams they're not the only ones doing that. They're just the ones that are the best at it right now. So yeah, no, we're not. I'm not giving the Celtics full credit for that. Absolutely not. No, they're doing what the league does. Really, Steph Curry. Steph Curry started that when he started taking threes from every which way and was hitting them and became the most prolific 3-point shooter in history. That's really where it started, and that's really where the strategy changed. And it's like, yeah, no more post presence. 3 is more than 2, which is just it's not fun. It's not fun, but again, it's not all on the Celtics for that. So no, you do not get credit for that whatsoever, Boston. But I don't know what the answer is with respect to it, but I do think 3-point shooting has ruined the game, at least the way that the league has focused on it going forward, truthfully. But let's get back into the geeky stuff. He said, I finally finished The Penguin, which was pretty strong throughout. The end scene when Oz did you-know-what to you-know-who was physically difficult to watch, and it really made me dislike him, which I think was exactly what the creative team intended. Yep, and it was effective for all of us. Scott and I absolutely talked about it and gave our raw thoughts over at DCTV Squadcast at Squadcast Media. Yeah, man, that was rough, definitely. He said, I also watched the new animated Lord of the Rings movie. It was surprisingly good. I was very skeptical going into it because in my mind, Middle-earth and anime just don't mesh. This is the War for Rohirrim, I believe is how it's pronounced. But he said, I thought they did a great job telling an engaging story, and the world of the movie felt like the same one from Peter Jackson's movies. It was a really fun watch. Yeah, that's on a long-term list. See if I can pop that in not too long from now. He said, I had less than favorable comments on Creature Commando's first 2 episodes, but I thought episodes 3 and 4 were big improvements, he says, especially episode 3. The way Gunn told the backstories of some of the characters in episodes 3 and 4 was good, and I found myself getting emotional over a character I was not expecting to elicit that reaction from me. The show's style of humor still isn't my absolute favorite, but I still will definitely keep watching, especially if we're going to keep getting strong character moments. I feel like that's also what happened with Peacemaker. I remember the first, 2 or 3 episodes of Peacemaker came out at the same time, and episode 3 was the one where it was like, oh, okay, all right, now I see where this show is going, now I see what this show is doing, and it was definitely like a more emotional character beat, something to that effect. So I feel like that might just be a Gunn staple in terms of how he structures his stories in that regard. So I'll definitely have to look out for that when I do finally get caught up on Creature Commandos here in the not-too-distant future. Alex here says, so the trades have reported that Chris Evans and Haley Atwell will be back for one or both of the upcoming Avengers movies. This would have been nice if kept as a surprise. The trades themselves are becoming like scoopers now. Yeah, well, especially since Marvel probably leaked it themselves because, again, they want to drum up hype. No more surprises. Now they want manufactured hype because they're trying to get back to the old Infinity Saga days. So it wouldn't surprise me if that was like an intentionally leaked story, if you will, or if it was something that Marvel Studios wanted to put out there because it's more of we're getting the band back together, right? More of what you loved and more of who you loved in the Infinity Saga is coming back for more, so come back and see us. That type of deal. That's what it reeks of to me, to be honest with you. But here, let's get to the more important thing that you talked about in this email, which is the Superman trailer, which you said you thought was great. You said you can tell from the specific images and sequences they used in the trailer that the movie is going to have a heck of a lot of heart. And I have to disagree with you on the use of the theme song. What a surprise. From my perspective, that classic theme, he says, has transcended the Christopher Reeve version as it's become the anthem for the character of Superman himself, which is why we've heard it over the decades attached to various versions. I don't have a big issue with the theme coming back again and again because it elicits a certain response from the audience, and it played a big part in the chills I got while watching the trailer. There's a reason that song has stood the test of time since its initial release. With that being said, I'm all for this new composer trying his hand at a brand new Superman theme for the DCU version. Hopefully he nails it, and we can have the best of both musical worlds. Okay, here's the thing I will say about this, Alex. Your reasoning for why you think that the theme has come back again and again, like it stood the test of time, is not the reason you think. It's not because, oh my goodness, the general audience loves this theme and they attach it to Superman, because they don't. You may think they do, but they don't. Because seriously, I'm not joking when I say that if I go to 10 random people and tell them that that theme was in the trailer, it's not going to elicit the nostalgic response that you think it's going to from the general audience. It does for you, and it does for fans of that theme, and it does for fans of Superman the movie, but it does not resonate with the general audience nearly as much. And I'll tell you what the big reason that it keeps coming back is. It's because we've only had two cinematic Supermen ever. Ever since 1978. Okay? Only two. Christopher Reeve and Henry Cavill. That's it. And again, I find it hilarious that in 2006, when Brandon Routh came on as the Christopher Reeve surrogate for Superman Returns, and the score from Superman the movie was resurrected by John Ottman, that we did not hear all of this romanticism like, oh my goodness, here it comes, this is great. Like, that movie bombed. Superman Returns bombed, okay? Like, they gave you what you wanted as far as, like, Superman the movie coming back in full form with the theme and everything, and it did not do well. And so then they try to do something differently with Man of Steel, 7 years later, and all of a sudden, all this rebellion, oh, I can't believe what they've done with Superman. It's such hypocritical bullshit from the fans, in my opinion. And again, this isn't like Batman, like, again, and I've asked this before, I've said this before. You ask 10 people randomly on the street what the most iconic Batman theme is, and most of them are going to tell you, no, Batman. They're not going to tell you Danny Elfman. They're not going to hum his theme. They're not going to hum, what Hans Zimmer did with the Dark Knight trilogy with James Newton Howard. They're not going to hum, anything from, what Michael Giacchino did in the Batman. No, they're going to hum that theme from Neil Hefti's tune from Batman 66, because there's been 6 or 7 different incarnations of Batman that have hit the big screen since 1966. Yes, we are counting Adam West. We most certainly are, right? And it's like, so he's allowed to have multiple themes because he's had multiple interpretations, but you guys are glomming on to the Williams theme because it's all you've had other than Henry Cavill. And if you felt a certain way about Zimmer's score for Man of Steel, and which of course was not reinforced throughout the franchise because of how laughably it was handled by the Jeff Johns, John Berg, and then later Walter Hamada. So now you're looking at their mismanagement of Superman during their tenure, and you're saying, oh, well, clearly that theme doesn't hold a candle to Williams. Well, it's only the second other theme that Superman's ever had cinematically, so that's not even a fair argument. So this idea that, oh my goodness, the music has stood the test of time, it's literally all we've had outside of Zimmer's stuff. That's why they keep using it, because there haven't been any other chances to give Superman another theme. This isn't like James Bond. James Bond has had 25 movies, and they kept reinforcing it. With, 6 or 7 different actors? I mean, it's all the different actors that have played Bond. There have been way more actors that have played Bond, and there have been way more Bond movies than there have been Superman movies since 1978. So this idea that the Williams theme stands the test of time, it's because it's all they've had to use. And don't give me Shirley Walker. Don't give me anything from the TV series, because you know good and damn well that it is not the same comparison. Comparing a TV theme to a cinematic theme. It does not hit the same way. It does not resonate the same way. And I'm not speaking against the Williams theme in terms of, I love the Williams theme. I love what it does. I love that composition and that score. But for crying out loud, so we're just going to shackle Superman forever to that one theme because it's all we've had, literally, other than the Zimmer theme. And the Zimmer theme did not get the appropriate treatment. It doesn't have nearly the amount of, it wasn't fairly treated compared to the Williams theme in that regard. It just, no, it's not fair. It is an unfair comparison, and this idea that it stands the test of time because, is this incredible thing? No, it's literally all that we've had. All that we've had. So we're stuck with it, apparently, because it's the only theme that Superman really has ever had that has been massively reinforced over a series of movies, because it was in all four of Christopher Reeve's films. The Man of Steel theme got one movie, one film, right? You hear a little bit of the piano stuff in Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, and you hear some of the motifs reinforced in in Zack Snyder's Justice League, but that came out even years after the Justice League movie came out. And then, of course, what they do in the Justice League movie, they went right back to the Williams theme of the Justice League movie. It's not a fair argument. It's not. It just is not a fair argument whatsoever. And you can feel however way you want about it. I think it's not fair. And I think it's bullshit, truthfully. I really do. That they want to just shackle Superman to one theme, for all interpretations. You wouldn't put the Neil Hefti theme with Christian Bale's Batman. You wouldn't. You wouldn't put it with Robert Pattinson's either. That's the equivalent of what you're trying to do with Superman. And I also brought it up with Spider-Man too. If you ask 10 random people in the general audience to hum the Spider-Man theme, most of them are going to start singing Spider-Man, Spider-Man does whatever a spider can. Would you attach that theme to Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man? Like as the official theme? Would you attach it to Andrew Garfield's or even Tom Holland's? No, you would not. This is the equivalent of what you're asking them to do with Superman, because you love it, because it's nostalgic for you, because it's only the second, like one of two Superman themes that have cinematically existed. And of course it's gotten more play. Of course it's gotten more respect because it was around first and it's been in more movies than the Zimmer theme was in Man of Steel, because that's fair. And so now you want to shackle David Corenswet's version with it because it's all you've known. And now it's the only theme Superman should ever had. You will never get me to agree on that, ever, whatsoever. It's all subjective. We can feel whatever way we want on that. And you can disagree with me all you like, but I definitely feel strongly about that. It is what it is, you know. As far as the best of both worlds, to me, the best case scenario, honestly, for me, Alex, is if they do something like what Michael Giacchino did with the 2009 Star Trek film, where he does build his own theme, and that is what we hear throughout the entirety of the film. And then at some point, when the end credits begin, we hear a mashup of the original Williams theme with whatever the new theme that John Murphy comes up for Superman is. If what we hear as the primary theme for Superman in the movie is what we heard in that trailer, that's a demerit. That's an absolute demerit for me, and I don't like that. I don't like it at all, and I never will. Truthfully, that's just how I feel about it, plain and simple. But let's move on to your most recent TNG update for this particular email. Again, this is from the December 20th email. He says, this week for TNG, I watched Q-Who. He says, so Guinan's not human, but some sort of imp-like creature? That's new. No, she's not imp-like. She's Elarian. Don't confuse her with an imp, seriously. That is the wrong image to take of Guinan going forward. She is an Elarian. That's as much as I will tell you. Believe me, going forward, you will see why she's not an imp. Or at least I hope you'll see why she's not an imp. In fact, I feel like calling her imp-like is insulting. But we'll move on. He says, Q is such an inconvenient being to deal with. Once he latches onto you, he's so tough to get rid of since he's pretty much all-powerful and can do whatever he wants. Yep, that's 100% true, and that's absolutely the point of his necessary evil character. But here, how about some bigger like implications that you ran into here? You said this episode seemed to have a bigger budget than usual. The Borg design was pretty cool, and I feel like this species of alien will definitely be back in the future. You have absolutely no idea. Stay tuned. You said the Borg ship reminds me of one of the trash cubes from WALL-E, but the interior of the ship looks really good, especially that long shot when Riker and crew first beam aboard. Just file the Borg away in your memory banks and prepare yourself because you are not ready. You're not. You're not ready for the impact that the Borg are about to have on the entirety of this franchise. Just put it that way. But he said something Star Trek gives us that Star Wars doesn't is hyperspace/warp speed battles between ships. In Star Wars, hyperspace is seen as an escape route. Once you make the jump, you've successfully gotten away. But in Star Trek, moving to warp speed isn't necessarily an escape, since enemy ships can just keep up with and pursue you. Yes, chases absolutely happen at warp multiple times, no doubt about it. He said Picard admitting defeat at the end was surprising. It's not your typical Hollywood ending, and I was definitely expecting the crew to outsmart Q. Yeah, no, not this time, because the implications of what's happening here are much bigger than Q. In fact, what Picard says at the end of this episode, maybe Q did the right thing for the wrong reason? Oh, you have no idea. Because if Starfleet had not been made aware of what was going on with this particular threat, Starfleet history, Federation history would have been wildly different. But you'll find out. Don't worry. Just keep the Borg in the back of your mind. They will be back. My goodness, I cannot wait to see your responses to what happens when you get to that point of the history. And that was the only episode that you watched in this fourth email, which that was appropriate. That episode is so seismic. That's such a watershed episode, watermark episode in the franchise, absolutely. But you did say on a personal note that you went to Orlando after Christmas for a Disney Universal trip. You also said you were happy to share that your wife and you are expecting your first baby in May. Congratulations. She really wants to do the gender reveal in front of the castle at Magic Kingdom, so that'll certainly be a dramatic way to discover if we're having a boy or girl. Happy holidays, Ray, and happy birthday. Thank you for the kind words there. So let's see. The final email to get caught up in here, the fifth email. which was on January 17th. So this is just 2 days ago that Alex sent this email. So here we are at the finish line of the catch-up with respect to his emails. His first question on this fifth and final email of the catch-up is, what are your thoughts on the Batman Part 2 being delayed? I am perfectly okay with it. I am quite patient. As I mentioned before, I think on the main show, I look at my, or I forget, it was either on the main show or on Patreon, I forget which one, but I just look over here at my shelf of physical media that is all Batman content, and as a Batman fan, I have nothing to complain about. I have nothing to be impatient about. I look forward to seeing what Matt Reeves and company do with the Batman Part 2 whenever they release it, because I'm not in a hurry. I'm not. I am willing to be patient. I know asking fans to be patient is, in many cases, can be like asking for peace in the Middle East, most certainly. I get that. But still, it's something that I'm not all freaked out about it. I'm not all, just like, oh my goodness, I can't believe it's being delayed again. What does this mean? What does that mean? Screw all the speculation. Screw all the impatience. I'm just not for that. I don't have the time or the energy or the patience to be impatient about this, truthfully. So I'm good. I'm fine. It happens when it happens. As long as, Reeves and company are developing it, which I think is a good idea, given how well the first film did and how well the Penguin did on HBO, I think it's a good idea to continue the Batman Epic Saga. Whenever they are done with it, I'm willing to give Matt Reeves whatever time he needs to get it done. Seriously. So continuing on with Alex's final email from 2 days ago, he said, I watched Alien Romulus and it was pretty good. Not sure if you're a fan of the Alien movies. I'm not an Alien superfan by any means. I've only seen each of the movies once. Romulus was fun and had a pretty creative final boss sequence. I have not watched Romulus. I wouldn't say necessarily that I am a fan. I do enjoy the Alien movies, but they also do freak me out. Just the concept of them. I've seen all of them except for Covenant and Romulus, and I also have not seen AVP Requiem. I have seen Alien, Aliens, Alien 3, and Alien Resurrection multiple times. I've seen all four of those numerous times. So that I know them extremely well, truthfully, all four of those movies. And I'm not quite as down on Resurrection as others until the third act. The third act of Resurrection is putrid, in my opinion. But it is what it is, that type of deal, right? But I did see Prometheus, right? I have seen Prometheus. We saw that at the theater, actually, truthfully. It wasn't quite the prequel that I thought it was going to be, but I still liked it for what it was. But like I said, I have not seen Covenant, and I have not seen Romulus. I was not going to go see Romulus in theaters because based on that trailer, I said, nope, I'm not going to be able to take that in a movie theater. And also, on top of that, they were doing the promotional stuff, and I don't know if they did it in any theaters around here, but I know like in New York and other places, they had people sitting on park benches with face huggers on their face, and they had RC-controlled face huggers running around the movie theater, and yeah, I'm not going to prison for that. I'm not going to jail for that, because I would have smashed one to bits, and I would have cussed out somebody, and that would not have been a good scene for me. So no, I did not go see the theater. I will watch it at some point. I will watch that, and I will watch Covenant at some point. I'll see if I can try to watch Covenant first. I've heard that timeline-wise, that Romulus takes place in between the first and second film, the Alien and Aliens, which I think is intriguing. Because that's during the time that Ripley was still asleep for 57 years after the initial encounter with the alien on the Nostromo. So yeah, I'm intrigued by it, but I'll find some time to watch it at a later date. It's on the list, just not necessarily high up on the list. We'll see how that goes. There's actually a few horror movies that I would like to watch before I watch that one. And I know it's like horror sci-fi, right? It's not like full-on horror like all the time. Like some of them are, but not all of them. But yeah, I'm intrigued. It's on the list for down the road in that regard. But he said, I watched a bunch more episodes of TNG, starting with Samaritan Snare. Now, this is a big deal episode for Lower Decks. It really is, because this is the episode that introduced the Pac-Leds, who got a real big resurgence in Lower Decks for sure. But he said, I enjoyed the conversation between Picard and Wesley on the shuttle. The story Picard told was well performed and engaging, even without the fight having to be shown. At some point, though, if you continue on, Alex, you're going to get to see that fight. That's as much as I'll tell you. You will get to see that fight. So just keep that in the back of your mind. Sometime down the road, you're going to get to see the story that he's talking about. Because this whole situation with his artificial heart does pop up again. And it's very intriguing because it involves somebody that you've mentioned in one of the in this email catch up. I won't say who, but a particular character you mentioned he's going to be involved with that in a later episode that I think is an awesome episode as well when we get to that point. But that's at least a couple seasons down the road. I'll at least say that much. But yeah, I hear you. This is the first time that we hear that story, and it's a very, it's a great decompression, disarming moment between Wesley and Picard in that shuttle pod for sure. You said the timing with Pulaski was weird in this one. It took hours for Picard and Wesley to get to Starbase 15. So then was Picard just hovering on the brink of death for hours till she arrived too? Well, I always assumed that Pulaski got there from the Enterprise. And the Enterprise obviously would, be faster than a shuttle pod, right? Because at that point, it was an emergency situation and they had to get out of the situation with the Pac-Leds in order to deliver her there, which is what led to him walking aboard the ship and the crew applauding and he's like, I beg your pardon, that type of thing. That's why I feel like the timing was faster for her than it was for Picard and Wesley. Originally it was leisurely, and then when they had complications during the surgery, they're like, okay, no, the Enterprise needs to get here at maximum warp, right? That type of deal. That's how I looked at it, to be honest with you. So, no, I don't think he was hovering out on the brink of death for hours. I just think that the Enterprise got there lightning quick in that regard. Then it says, next up was Up the Long Ladder. You said some clones want to start a brand new society. I don't have too much to say about this one. It was kind of a weird episode and felt random. Yes, and it's kind of the parallel Earth thing a little bit again, right? Because they're kind of human. They're human, but different human, and the whole clone thing. Yeah, I feel you. This isn't one of the better episodes of season 2, but it has its amusing moments here and there, if you will. Then you said next was Manhunt. You said, hold on. I saw the name Majel Barrett in the opening credits. Isn't that Nurse Chapel in the computer voice from TOS? It's weird they reuse the same exact actor for a completely different role. Not sure if I'm the biggest fan of that. But you've seen her before, because Majel Barrett Roddenberry, may she rest in peace, has played Lwaxana already in the first season. Wasn't it Haven when she first appeared? I don't know why you're not a fan of that. I mean, here's the thing. Chapel, obviously is Chapel, right? And the funny thing about this is she continued to play Nurse Chapel in bit parts during the original series films in that regard, right? I think we definitely saw her in the motion picture. Did we see her? No, we didn't see her in Wrath of Khan, but we did see her did we see her in 3? No, we might not have seen her in 3, but we did see her in 4. She was part of Starfleet in Star Trek 4. That is for sure. Trying to remember where else we saw her in the movies, but her playing a different character, I've never had an issue with that, to be honest with you, whatsoever, especially with the lore and the character lore that she builds as Lwaxana going forward. Just get used to seeing her. She's going to pop up at inopportune times throughout the show. Okay, there's at least probably, I'll say, one good Lwaxana episode damn near every season going forward. So just know that when she shows up, it's going to be silly hilarity and hijinks at her expense in that regard, and at her design, if you will. But no, I don't have a problem with her also being the voice of the computer and also being the Chapel from beforehand. I have no issues with that whatsoever. And Paramount, I think, largely hasn't had issues with that either, which is why they don't have problems necessarily recasting, different actors for roles, but also in terms of bringing other people back in different roles, which get used to that with Brent Spiner going forward. That's just some more foreshadowing for the rest of the franchise that I can bring up with respect to that, which is interesting because this next part, you said Picard using Data's conversational long-windedness to save him from Lwaxana was a good character moment. Oh yeah, this is where, yeah, the massive crush that she has on Picard, just absolutely, this is where it's at its strongest. For obvious reasons, as you saw in terms of the Betazoid biology in that regard. Yeah, it's pretty overt in that regard, and that was a funny character moment. It says, you said the funny thing about Detective Dixon Hill, that is that it shows Picard has hobbies and things he does for fun, despite seeming so stuck up to everyone else. Oh yeah, he's absolutely humanized whenever he plays Dixon Hill, and it is cool when he goes into the Dixon Hill persona. And I was also glad that the big goodbye in the first season didn't swear him off of going back to the Dixon Hill recreation just because it threatened his life and the life of his chief medical officer and that crewman that got shot in the first season. I'm glad he still returned to it. And he does continue to return to it. He even returns to it in one of the movies. I won't say which one. But at any rate, he says the only thing I'm not crazy about is that when they get too deep into the Dixon stuff, it just doesn't feel like you're even watching Star Trek anymore. Reminds me of the Mock Earth episodes. You have got a thing against the Mock Earth episodes, and again, it's all subjective. That is your business. Doesn't bother me. I like when they do delves into like 20th century and stuff that is closer to our time, because I like to see the fish out of water stuff a lot of times when they do that. Fish out of water is a time-honored scenario within the franchise for sure. So it does not bother me like at all in that regard, to be honest with you. But then you said, finally, I watched The Emissary. You said, so can only one person or one group of people use the holodeck at any time? I imagine it'd be really busy. Or maybe it has some type of reservation system or something. As far as I know, aren't there more than one? Isn't there more than one holodeck aboard the Enterprise? I'm pretty sure there is. Yeah, there are 16 holodecks on a Galaxy-class starship like the Enterprise D. So, yeah, they're not all sharing just one. There are multiples. So, they're probably going to a different holodeck every time. But, yeah, there's a few of them. There's more than a few of them in that regard. So, there are others that are using the other holodecks at the time that you're seeing whatever is happening at the holodeck in the episode that we're watching in that regard. But remember how big this ship is, man. There's 1,014 people, civilians and military officers included aboard the Enterprise D at any given time. So yeah, that's a lot. A lot of resources, a lot of space. It's a huge, huge ship. No doubt about that. Your next episode up that you're going to be watching is Peak Performance. Oh, that is one of my more favorite ones in this weaker season 2, if you will. But he says, live long and prosper. And P.S., he does it. They did do the gender reveal. He says it's a girl. Little Amelia will be here in a few months now for in the spring. And I'm so excited, he says. Congratulations. It's a girl. I can't wait for more updates on that, Alex. Thank you very much for sharing them with us here. Your email catch up here, because we went through 5 different emails. This was about the length of an Anthony Dorsey email segment, but it's all good because we don't have that much longer left in this particular recording. Thank you, good sir. Glad we were able to finally get caught up on all of your Flight Chat emails. Looking forward to more of your feedback in the future. All right, so now all that is left to get caught up on here in this big catch-up email session of Flight Chat is a couple of emails from Mr. Jared Cardos. Let's go back to October 26th. He sent an email titled Crypto and Creature Commandos. He said, hey, Ray, hope you're doing well. Been a bit of a quiet week or so in terms of news, probably because of Halloween. Yes, that's when he sent this, but wanted to put out thoughts on some big reveals that happened recently at that time. He said, but before that, there was a fairly big Superman reveal before the con in crypto. This is something that's been kind of sort of confirmed for a bit because he's been mentioned a fair amount in the past, like suggesting a crypto game when talking about how games connected to the DCU might work. And without going into spoilers, crypto also plays a role in the Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow story. Yes, we do all know that. But it's cool to have direct confirmation, and I really like the story of how Gunn's experience of adopting a rescue dog bled into the story of Superman. I feel like things like this will help make this feel like a solid and authentic story with superheroes, maybe lessen some of the cynicism that can come from people thinking just another superhero reboot, if that makes any sense. Oh, I agree. I think that it is an absolute asset of this film, potentially, that James Gunn is using his own personal connection with animal rescues to inform the crypto part of the story. I think that absolutely can lend itself to a great deal of heart that hopefully the general audience will latch on to and appreciate. No doubt about it. Here's hoping, for sure. We're only months away from that release, of course. He said, and then there was the Creature Commandos trailer, which I think might have been the biggest news that came out of New York Comic Con. Again, this is back in October that Jared wrote this. He said, I thought it worked really well, showed off all these new characters in an effective way. It feels kind of very Suicide Squad Guardians of the Galaxy, but it's something that Gunn is good at. It's also cool to see some greater DC references in there, from the main villain confirmed to be the Wonder Woman villain Cersei, to also bringing in Batman villains like Clayface and Rupert Thorne. The animation and action all looks really good. Definitely feels like it's going to be a fun, soft launch into the DCU. He said, this might be the shortest email I've done, but I'm sure things will pick up soon. Until then, looking forward to future episodes. Yes, future episodes that were massively spread out. So that was Jared's first email on this email catch-up that he sent way back on October 26th. Now we go to his next email, which he sent on December 19th. So, yeah, as the show took a break, so did he, but this is definitely a longer email. He said, totally get why you had to take a break for a while, but glad you're back. He says, so I think I'm going to start with some thoughts on your latest episode since coming back, then go into some of the things that's come out recently, spoiler free, again, as of December 19th. So this is a month ago that he sent this email. He said, first, you talked about how you think the coming administration, the political administration, will affect some of the media coming out. And I would say that it's already begun, twice by Disney. They recently pulled an episode of their animated show Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur that was already finished and ready to air, but it also dealt with a trans athlete and Disney got cold feet. That said, someone with access to the Disney Vault was daring and leaked the episode. Then they talked about removing mentions of a character being trans through ADR in an upcoming animated streaming show Pixar is developing called Win or Lose. What's weird about this is that I don't think I've heard anything about this series until this news, making it one of the worst marketing tactics I've ever seen. I can see more stuff like this happening, sadly, but I hope that there's enough outcry about these that Disney and other corporations decide it's not worth the effort to appease the MAGA folk. Yeah, I hope you're right, Jared. We've seen a lot of these corporations pull back on their diversity, equity, and inclusion, directives, if you will, basically the affirmative action of our time, and they're pushing back on it because they think it's racist against white people, and it's unfortunate that they don't understand, that we are not at full equality and have never been in our lifetime, and they think that all of these efforts to actually try to achieve equality are just anti-white. It's very sad that they feel this way, that they're so misinformed and uneducated to believe that, but it is what it is, and hopefully, when it comes to these corporations, when it comes to these studios, the way that you maximize your profits is by taking your money from everyone. Like you don't just accept money from white people. You don't just accept money from men. You accept money from women. You accept money from black people. You accept money from, Asian people, Jewish people, whoever it is, right? There should be no discrimination with respect to the dollars that people spend on tickets or on merchandise or whatever, or on streaming services especially, right? So hopefully at the end of the day, that wins out. And, we don't see a complete rollback to just white guys named Chris helming everything with respect to these shows and movies. But we'll see how it goes. I can't say I'm that optimistic, but I have a little bit of hope. I do. He says, also on the Captain America trailer, it looks pretty good. This is when the Brave New World trailer came out. Excited to see where it goes. What I'm curious about with this now, because of the election results, is how the idea of Captain America fighting the President of the United States is going to play for audiences after this election. Hey, you know what? We'll see. We'll see how it goes. I mean, they're committed to it. And, I don't think that they're going to make massive changes, although it is the MCU. They could make massive changes at a moment's notice. We know they've done that, but we are less than a month away from the release of that film. So, hopefully they stick to their original plan with it, regardless of, who is in office. But, we'll see. We'll see how it goes. But I hear you. That could be an interesting discussion that people have. It most certainly could, for a number of reasons. But he said on that episode, you mentioned something about other potential news that came during your brief absence, and there was one not mentioned that I thought might be interesting to bring up. On November 7th, or N7 Day, there wasn't a lot of big announcements for future Mass Effect games, since they just recently dropped their newest game about a week prior, which I may or may not be talking about a few paragraphs from now. But they did announce plans for a Mass Effect TV series set to be on Amazon Prime. I'm going to go in with some cautious optimism, he says, since some of the people they brought in are hit and miss. But what I'm wondering, and the question I would ask of you is, would you want them to adapt the story of the games, or instead do their own story set within the universe? Personally, I think I can accept them doing the story. Them doing their own version isn't going to magically delete the save files I have, after all. However, I'm not sure if I'm ready for the fandom breakdown about things like whether Shepard is a man or a woman on the show, let alone love interest and such. I think that when it comes to that, and yes, I did hear some rumblings about a Mass Effect TV series. I think when it comes to which way would I like to see them do it, whatever way fits their creative vision, truthfully, I think that trying to adapt that game, I mean, it's such a Kobayashi Maru. It's such an no-win situation, especially since that game gives you the option of playing different genders with respect to the Shepard character, right? Which one do they decide to go with? Which one do they decide to choose? Which direction do they go? There's already a right or a wrong answer in a lot of fans' minds with respect to which Shepard they decide to go with. And then you get into, what is he, a spacer? Is he an engineer? Like, is he a Vanguard? What is he going to be, right? Like, that's, what class is it? What powers? How biotic is he going to be? Like, there's a whole lot of customization with the Shepard character that whatever way they choose is not going to satisfy everyone. It just isn't, based on the way that we play the game. So to me, I'm open to seeing what their storytelling is like and how they actually bring in the Turians and the Solarians and the Quarians, and like how all those dynamics are created, and how much of a space opera they decide to build with them, the Krogan and all that stuff, right? Like, that's what I'm most curious about, is how they, and the Asari, of course, the Asari, my goodness, like all of that. Like, I'm most curious to see, like, what the budget for this show is, because it's it's not going to be a small budget by any stretch of the imagination. Not like Bezos can't afford it, that jerk. But, just to see like how they do all the character dynamics and the character development within all the different races and CSEC and the Citadel and all that. Like, I'm more intrigued by like the structure of the story and how they're going to go with it. Because the details and the nitty gritty that we're all used to and that we all customize, there is no right or wrong answer. It's going to change. Like, what they do is not going to please all of us. And maybe it'll be even more different than what any of us do in that regard. We'll see. But I am open-minded. I'm definitely open-minded. Because like you said, nothing that they do erases my save file for Mass Effect Legendary Edition. It does not. It doesn't erase your save files either. So, the game is still there. The game still exists in that regard, no matter what they do with this show. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. He says, also, I hear you a bit on the backlog, Wells. I know I got a lot of stuff I need to get through at some point. That said, I do try to look at it from a glass half full perspective. It just means there's always something cool out there that I want to see or read or play. If I find myself without a list or no interest in doing anything with it, that's a sign of bigger problems. Agreed. That's a very, very good way, very positive way of looking at it, Jared. I appreciate that. Now on to some of those things in said list I have been able to catch up on, he said. I'm going to do something a little different in talking about the recent things I've seen in alphabetical order, starting with Creature Commandos, which I'm really enjoying, he says, though I will say it was a little rough for me at first. Between a lot of setup that is very reminiscent of Gunn's previous work like The Suicide Squad and a gag that ran for a little too long, I had a bit of an already seen it reaction to the first episode. But thankfully they released the first two episodes together, because after the setup, and when the story starts picking apart the characters, it becomes far more interesting and entertaining. They do a great job with making you feel for these characters, some of them downright monstrous, in just around 20 minutes. Combine that with some excellently animated action and a plot that later takes some turns I didn't expect, I think this has the makings of a great, technically first foray into the DCU. Can't wait to finally get caught up on it, for sure, because I've watched none of it as of yet. But he says, next, I'll go into something that was a contributing factor to why I'm behind on some things, and that's the newest BioWare game, Dragon Age: The Veilguard. This is something that I've been waiting for a while, since the last game in the franchise, Dragon Age Inquisition, came out literally almost a decade ago, and it's had its share of development issues. Where it initially started as a single-player RPG, then got scrapped to make a multiplayer live service game, and then got scrapped again to be a single-player RPG again. But despite all of that, I think they managed to make a pretty good continuation of the series, he says. The gameplay is fun, talking more of an action route, and had some really great new characters. Some of my favorites include Nev, a magic-wielding private eye in a city so corrupt it makes Gotham look like a nice vacation zone, and Emmerich, a posh, gentlemanly necromancer obviously modeled after Vincent Price, with a walking skeleton companion named Manfred. All right. He says it's not without its faults, though. The first few hours are probably the weakest, but it picks up after you start recruiting characters for your team. Perhaps the worst part of it, he says, is that the game only picks up on 3 choices from the previous game. It's not an exact comparison, but it almost feels like if Mass Effect 3 only picked up on things like who your Shepard romanced and what you did at the end of the collector base. I didn't need to have every decision ever made in the series matter, but a little more than 3 would have been nice. All that said, though, what it lacks in reacting to past game choices, it more than makes up for in how it reacts to some of your choices in-game. There's some big choices that you get early on that affects the rest of the game, and this game has possibly the best big endgame set-piece missions since ever, really. It feels like something like Ilos and the Suicide Mission cranked up to 11. So overall, a pretty solid game. All right. Intriguing. BioWare, Mass Effect is the only BioWare game I've ever played, truthfully. I have not gotten into some of the other stuff because, I'm more big into tech and guns and spaceships and stuff like that. I've never really been into the Fabled stuff. That's more Shonda's realm in that regard. I wonder if she's aware of this. I'll have to find that out. She's been playing a lot of Assassin's Creed lately, but yeah, that's definitely something to keep an eye on. Thank you for the review and the thoughts on that one. BioWare, Dragon Age: The Veilguard. Pardon me. There we go. He says, then there's Star Wars Skeleton Crew. I might be an episode or two behind, he says, a month ago when he wrote this. But while I was curious about it when I saw trailers, it became far more intriguing after watching it. Without getting too into spoilers, I thought it was weird at first to see such a nice, quiet suburban life in Star Wars, but it became more interesting when I realized it was odd for everyone else around them too. There's more going on than meets the eye with these kids and where they come from, and I'm intrigued to see where it goes next. All right. Got to get caught up on Skeleton Crew 2. Have not watched any of that show either. Oh, the list is long. But he says, finally, something that's pretty fitting to what we'll talk about next time, and that's Superman, the Christopher Reeve story. While I didn't quite hit the waterworks like I've seen others talk about, it's definitely a great look at Reeve's life before Superman, during, and after his accident. One thing that I was pleasantly surprised at was the movie's ability to approach all aspects of the man, both the good and the bad, without making him out as some saint or bad person, but a normal and complete human being. I definitely learned more about him than I did after, and I think it's a good watch for people who are either fans of Superman in the movies or of just interesting people who overcome huge adversities. He says, I think I'll leave it here before I have to send this via Digital Raven. I'll come back soon with all the talk about Superman. Until then, yeah, I still haven't seen Superman, the Christopher Reeve story. And not only is it on Max now, but CNN either recently showed it or they're about to air it in edited form. So I will not watch it on CNN. I definitely want to watch the unabridged version, if you will, on Max. But yeah, I still have not seen it, to be honest with you. It's still on the list. Definitely one that I should see sooner than later in that regard. But let's get to Jared's last email. Now, he still sent this a few weeks ago. This is back on December 26th. But this is Superman set visits and trailer talk is the last email that he sent. Asked if I hope that I was doing well, hope that I had a good holiday. I did, other than being sick in that regard. But he said, so I'll get the big thing out of the way and talk about the Superman trailer, which I liked quite a bit, he said. I had a feeling that the movie wouldn't be quite as goofy and funny as some of Gunn's past movies or previous MCU movies, but this seemed way more serious and epic than I expected. It definitely worked as a teaser and made me more excited to see it this coming July, and I was already in for it. Like you, I was hoping for a more original score, but I could easily see it being a marketing thing, even if only 1 to 3 out of 10 in the casual audience gets it. That will likely entice those 1 to 3. Yeah, it will, but that's an accurate number though, Jared. 1 to 3, for all the people that want to act like the general audience swoons over that theme every time that it's played. No, they do not, I assure you. As much as you want to think they do, they do not. Not you, Jared, but just people in general that are so in love with that theme and think it should only be Superman's only theme. And he says, and speaking of which, talking about stuff mentioned in the past couple of episodes, the poster was great. Hello, new wallpaper. And the music that accompanied the poster was good. And while I still hope this Superman has more of his own original theme, there was a theory I saw that I loved the idea of where the vocalizing of the Williams theme is Clark's birth mother, Lara, a memory of her singing to him for the last time before putting him in the rocket to save him, using the 78 theme in a thematic way, a dreamy, nostalgic melody of love and hope. A theory so good, I'm going to be a little bummed when it's proven to be wrong. If that was what it was, Jared, and if that's all that it was, just a theme, like you said, dreamy, nostalgic melody of love and hope, and they only use it as that, and they still gave him a new theme, I'd be happy with that. I'd be completely happy with that, as long as he still got a new theme. David Cornswet Superman deserves the freedom to be able to have his own theme separate from the Christopher Reeve version that so many fans can't let go of. That continues to be my perspective on it. Jared later says, the talk about the trunks David Cornswet's reasoning to keep them in is something I'm not sure I entirely buy. So for people who don't know, we talked about this before. Cornswet is the one that made the argument that Superman is trying to not look scary to kids, and so that's why he's wearing the red underwear. That was his argument for them to wear the trunks. And he says, I don't think a pair of red underwear is going to make that much of a change in whether a kid will be initially afraid of a guy who can lift mountains and shoot heat from their eyes. That ability to make kids and the innocent not afraid of him comes from his demeanor, not from what he's wearing. That said, it is a far better reason than what I mostly hear, which usually turns to, but it's tradition, Jared says. So props for that. But hey, it hasn't been a deal breaker before, and it won't be now. Yeah, I 100% agree with you on that, Jared. I'm still going to watch the movie. Do I prefer it? No. Will I grin and bear it? Yes, I will. It'll be fine. It is what it is. But it is absolutely more about how the character is portrayed and how Cornswet plays the character than it is about whether or not he wears those trunks to, disarm children in that regard. Completely agree with that. He says, it's funny you mentioned that you thought that Metamorpho looked like a villain at first. And I thought so too before I saw people talking about old Rex. And I was like, oh, right. Is that the intention for the trailer? Maybe this is a Rex Mason fresh from his forced transformation. The seemingly more corporate heroes and Guy and Hawkgirl are after him, and Superman is the one who's trying to protect him. It's very possible I'm wrong and the movie is about something else completely, but I do like how there's still so much to discover. That's some comic lore that you're dropping there, or maybe from the animated series or whatever that I don't remember, but perhaps we'll see how that goes. But he says, I can't say I know what that giant monster is that Superman and crew were fighting, but I will say that if I had a nickel for every time a James Gunn DC project involved a kaiju monster, I'd have 3 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it's happened thrice. Speaking of which, I think I have an idea of what the big ball of death is in the nighttime scenes with Clark, Superman, and Lois, but I don't want to say just yet because it might be from All-Star Superman. Similarly, I have a theory about the approach to Clark and Lois and the secret identity that they might use that Gunn has said would be different, but that might be a spoiler for All-Star Superman. You might think that this is a suggestion to read All-Star Superman, and you might be right. Well, that's probably enough. Looking forward to your future episodes. Jared, of course, thank you very much for the feedback, and I do plan to read All-Star Superman before watching Superman. I don't know how soon I will before the movie, but I definitely will see it before seeing the movie, just like I read Zero Year. I was advised to read Batman Zero Year before watching the Batman. I'm glad I did because I saw the parallels and I saw the connections there. So I will do the same here, knowing that Superman, All-Star Superman is it also either All-Star Superman or Superman for All Seasons? One of those two, if not both, I know have been cited as direct inspirations to this movie in regard. So, I would like to read both of them, honestly, before seeing Superman. And I've got some time here. I've just got to get my DC Universe Infinite subscription in order, if you will, because it's been some time since I've even remotely been on that site or paid for that subscription service. But as soon as I get those ducks in a row, then yes, I can launch into it and have it read before seeing the Superman movie this July 11th, no doubt. But thank you, as always, for the feedback, Jared. Glad that we were able to get caught up on it. Glad you only had 3 emails, but it's all good. Thank you very much for the feedback, good sir. And there we have it. Tons of emails of feedback over the last couple of months, read in under 2 hours. How about that? We were able to make it under the gun. That is awesome. Thank you so much to everybody listening to this show. That'll do it for this episode of Flight Chat. Thank you to all of you who sent in emails. Thank you to John. Thank you to Alex De Silva, and thank you to Jared Cardos for all of your emails that you sent in. Apologies for how long it took to get this catch-up episode going. We'll definitely endeavor to do more consistent episodes of Flight Chat here on the weekends going forward. Had a good amount to talk about still, though, with respect to everything going on in the last couple of months and everything going on here as we continue on to begin the year of 2025. But thank you so much for listening to this show. And for those of you that want to join the feedback circle, let's get it back going again. You know where to find me on BLUESKY now. I am on BLUESKY at FlightCast. And for now, the FlightCast Facebook page is also active. Whether that changes in the near future, I will let you know. But you can also always reach me by email at ray@theflightcast.com. So, and there's also posts available. I know some people have posted on the YouTube channel as well, FlightCast on YouTube as well, the FlightCast on YouTube as well. So, yep. Until the next episode, take care, stay safe out there, have a great and safe 2025 going forward, and I will see you all next time. Take it easy.